Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, 2 o'clock in the morning. London is asleep. The streets are empty, candles are out. The city breathes slowly, quietly, the way it always does at this hour. Nobody knows that in 48 hours, most of this city will no longer exist. To understand what happened, you need to picture what London actually looked like in 1666. This wasn't the London of stone bridges and grand boulevards. This was a medieval city that had never really been rebuilt. Nearly 400,000 people crammed into a space of barely a few square miles. Houses built so close together that neighbours on upper floors could shake hands across the street. Narrow alleyways where two people could barely pass each other. Rooftops made of thatch, walls made of timber, and beneath it all, years of grease, sawdust, and hay soaked into the wood of every building. That summer had been brutal. No rain for months. The timber was bone dry. Historians who later studied the conditions described it as a perfect storm, waiting for a single spark. That spark had a name. Farriner was the royal baker. He supplied bread to the king's navy. His bakery sat on Pudding Lane, a narrow street in the heart of the city. On the evening of Saturday, September 1st, he worked late as usual, fired the ovens, baked his last batch, and when he was done, he did what he always did. He checked the oven, believed it was out, and went upstairs to bed. What he didn't know, or didn't notice, was that somewhere inside that oven, buried under ash, a single ember was still alive. At around 2 o'clock, one of Farriner's maids woke up. The room was thick with smoke. She screamed. The household scrambled out of bed. Farriner, his daughter, another servant, and they escaped through an upstairs window, crawling along the rooftops of neighbouring houses to safety. One maid couldn't bring herself to climb out, whether she was too frightened or too disoriented from the smoke. We don't know. She stayed behind. She would become the first recorded victim of the Great Fire of London. Down on the street below, the fire was already spreading. The bakery shared a wall with a hay and feed warehouse. Hay burns fast. From there, it jumped to a tavern. The wind, blowing hard from the east that night, pushed the flames. Someone woke the Lord Mayor. Sir Thomas Bloodworth was dragged from his bed and brought to Pudding Lane to assess the situation. He stood there in the early hours of the morning, looked at the growing blaze, and delivered what would become one of the most catastrophically wrong judgments in the history of urban firefighting. Pish, he reportedly said.
The flames are too high!
A woman
Get
could
back!
piss it out. Then he went home to sleep. This moment matters. In 17th century London, there was a method for stopping fires. You demolished the buildings in the fire's path to create a gap it couldn't cross. But that required the Lord Mayor's authority. Bloodworth refused to give it. He didn't want to be responsible for tearing down houses that might not need to come down. That decision would cost the city everything. Someone woke the Lord Mayor. Sir Thomas Bloodworth was dragged from his bed and brought to Pudding Lane to assess the situation. He stood there in the early hours of the morning, looked at the growing blaze, and delivered what would become one of the most catastrophically wrong judgments in the history of urban firefighting. Pish, he reportedly said. A woman could piss it out. Then he went home to sleep. This moment matters. In 17th century London, there was a method for stopping fires. You demolished the buildings in the fire's path to create a gap it couldn't cross. But that required the Lord Mayor's authority. Bloodworth refused to give it. He didn't want to be responsible for tearing down houses that might not need to come down. That decision would cost the city everything. A few miles away, Samuel Pepys, naval administrator, compulsive diarist, and one of our most important eyewitnesses to these events, was woken by a maid who told him there was a fire in the city. He got up, looked out the window, decided it didn't look too serious, and went back to bed. By the time he woke again a few hours later, the sky over London was orange. Pepys rushed to the scene and couldn't believe what he saw. Streets jammed with people dragging whatever they could carry. Furniture, clothes, boxes of papers. People throwing their belongings into the Thames just to get them out of the houses. Pigeons, he wrote, refused to leave their roosts on the windowsills, even as the buildings burned around them, hovering until their wings caught fire. Pepys went directly to the king. Charles II listened, and unlike his Lord Mayor, he understood the danger immediately. He sent word: houses must be demolished, fire breaks must be created. But by now, hours had been lost. The fire was finally brought under control on Wednesday, not by water, but by gunpowder. Teams went ahead of the flames and blew up entire rows of houses, creating gaps wide enough that even the wind-driven fire couldn't cross. It was brutal, destructive, and it worked. When it was over, the scale of the damage was almost impossible to take in. 13,000 homes destroyed, 87 churches reduced to rubble, the Royal Exchange, the Guildhall, 44 livery company halls, gone. St. Paul's Cathedral would need to be rebuilt from scratch. An estimated 100,000 people were homeless, many of them camping in fields outside the city for weeks. The official death toll was just 6 people. 6. For a fire of this scale, that number has puzzled historians ever since. The most likely explanation is simple and grim. The deaths of the poor were not recorded. The city counted buildings. It didn't count everyone inside them. In the years that followed, London was rebuilt, and rebuilt differently. Architect Christopher Wren drew up ambitious plans. Streets were made wider. Buildings were required to be made of brick and stone. Wren himself oversaw the construction of a new St. Paul's Cathedral, which still stands today, and rebuilt 51 churches across the city. The London that rose from the ashes was more fireproof, more organised, more modern. Some historians argue the fire was one of the most important events in the city's history, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it made possible. But none of that changes what those 48 hours felt like for the people who lived through them. The sleepless nights, the orange sky, the sound of a city burning, the walk away from a home you would never see again. It started with one baker, one oven, one ember that wasn't quite out. If you want to know how London was rebuilt, and why Christopher Wren's original plan for the city was never actually used, that's the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.